Hi, I didn't see you there. In this video, we're gonna make this arcade machine. Or is it? I wasn't playing anything. What do you mean? So we're gonna cover this entire build from start to finish, and I know that some points can get boring. So if you click down below next to the timestamp, it should say the word intro right now. If you click on that, it'll bring up some timestamps of where you can jump through in the video to what you actually want to see. So in saying that, let's start building.
Okay, so let's have a look at my 3D model. Essentially, I just took the screen that I'm going to be using and made a Tardis around that, using the measurements from the screen. Now, I made the Tardis, if I turn off the sides here, I'll turn off the front as well. So that this inner frame is what I sort of built off. And all I did was make it as wide as the screen and as tall as the screen, knowing that the screen was going to lay back, but I just made it as tall as the screen because I knew then I would have enough space. And I added about 10 mil for the width, just so there was a little bit of space for the screen to fit correctly. So if we turn the sides back on, you can see that all four sides are exactly the same, except for these upright pieces here in the corners. Now, these are, if I turn off, so we can turn off this police box here, that is a separate piece cut out of thicker material. And then we also have these corner uprights. So if we go for the left upright here, and which one's the other one? This one here. I wanted to have it so that this piece here can just be cut multiple times. Oh, I didn't turn off the right one. So this piece here is just cut 4 times to create the 4 sides, and it's all cut out of one piece of material, and all of these little squares and everything is all little step downs, except for the windows are fully cut out. So I wanted to cut the whole thing out of one piece of material so that I didn't have to then assemble all of these little pieces and everything. So all 4 sides are cut the same as that, and then you've got these corner pieces here, and these corner pieces are made where they overhang on the sides to be flush with the front of the front piece, the front of this panel here, this one here. And then these side pieces are a little bit wider, so they overhang to be flush with this part here, with this upright. And then all of them get the little police sign box on top, and then the top is all cut separate and the base is cut separate. So if we turn my cut files back on over here, you can see that I have laid out the 3 panels that need to be cut out. This whole machine is cut out of 3 sheets of MDF, 2 being 6mm and 1 being 16mm. So if I come over to sketches, you can see here what I did is I actually came along and I made 3 rectangles that are the size of the sheets that I'm going to be cutting out of, and then I knew where I could lay everything out to fit. Once I had this laid out, all I had to do was go over to manufacture and create some cut files for the CNC.
I cut out all of the pieces on my CNC using 2 sheets of 6mm MDF and 1 sheet of 16mm MDF. Now that I had everything cut out, I could start by assembling the interior frame and gluing on the base plate. Now that the frame was dry, I could start to fit the screen. I decided the screen was at a good angle, just laying back from the front of the frame onto the rear of the frame, and could design the interior sides. The screen ended up fitting pretty perfect in that from the edge of the screen to the inside of the frame was exactly 3mm on each side. So I grabbed out the old school laptop and started measuring. I measured all around the screen and drew a picture with the measurements to transfer into Fusion 360. I also added a hole on each side for the speakers. Once I had the design, it was as easy as cutting them on the CNC and gluing them in place. I will add here that I did miss a measurement and also forgot about the speakers, so this was actually my 3rd set of sides. Gave everything a quick sand and started painting with this primer filler. You can find this at most auto stores. The main reason for doing this was to fill all the seams and give a cleaner finish, but also to allow the paint to stick better. I did 3 coats of filler, sanding in between, and then painted everywhere that you will see with black spray paint. These are from the speakers I'm using and were grey, so I painted them too. Before going on any further, I super glued in the magnets for the rear panel.
This video is proudly sponsored by PARA-dise Creations. PARA-dise Creations is an amazing company that makes paracord bracelets just like these, and they also make stuff like dog leashes and dog collars and all different sorts of things. They even make bracelets for kids. Everything made by PARA-dise Creations is made to the highest quality, and they also offer worldwide shipping. All products are customizable, and they have many different styles available, with more getting released all the time. Every order is handmade by the owner of the company, and I must say he's a bit of a hunk. Yeah, that's right. I'm the owner of the company, and yes, I do hand make every single order, and they are made to the highest quality. So visit us on Facebook and on Etsy to see what we have to offer and to order yours today. Now back to the video.
I bought these cheap speakers for $10 and installed them into the interior side panels. I did have to extend the wire between the two speakers, and once installed, I hot glued the wires in place just to ensure that they don't get pulled and broken. The plastic parts that I spray painted black screw over the speakers holding them in place, and then they have a black grill to hide the speakers and screws. Everything was now done for the frame, and I could install the screen permanently. I slid the screen in from one side and used hot glue to hold it in place. It was a pretty snug fit. The glue was just to stop it moving from side to side. Each panel gets a strip on each side glued on, with the front and back panels getting wider strips. The side strips overhang by 6mm, which is the thickness of the panels, and the front and back panel strips overhang by 12mm, which is the thickness of the panel and the strips on the side panels. Once the strips are dry, I can glue on the top side panels. These are positioned directly above the middle strip and level with the top. Now it's time to paint. I followed the same procedure as the frame with the spray on primer filler and ended up doing 4 coats with sanding in between. For the Tardis color, I'm going to attempt to use this sprayer sold at the auto store that allows you to turn any paint into a 2-pack paint. I'm using interior house paint toned to the official Tardis blue color, and to use the sprayer I have to water it down a lot. It took me ages to get this thing to work, and honestly I wasn't really impressed. I found that I got just as good, if not better finish, just using a paintbrush and the watered down paint. I did 4 coats of blue, and once the last coat was dry, I installed the stickers for the top of the police box signs. I printed these at my local office store on a sticker paper and cut them out. After sticking on a sticker, I went around the edge and trimmed off a few mil using a Stanley knife blade, so that I could install these little frames on top with super glue. These little frames I just cut on the CNC and painted the same as the panels. For the windows, I got these file storage boxes from the cheap store and cut out rectangles big enough to cover the back of the windows and super glued them in place. The only one I had to measure precisely was the front, and I'll talk about that later on in the video. I ended up recutting the top of the button box out of thicker material, as the joystick needs to be screwed in place and the 6mm wasn't thick enough for that. I glued all of the panels together using masking tape to hold them in place until I could put some clamps on there. There wasn't a good way to clamp the top in place, so I just sat something heavy on top. Once the glue was dry, I painted the box the same as everything else in black. I cut 2 scrap pieces of wood to fit into the box and held them in place, the thickness of the windows down from the top, with clamps so that I could screw them in place. Now this is where the front panel window comes in. The reason I had to cut a more precise size was so that it would fit inside the button box. I added super glue to the bottom of the wood I screwed into the button box and glued the box in place on the back of the window. Once the glue was dry, I could unscrew the box and remove it. To install the joystick, I used some double-sided tape to hold it in place so that I could line it up on the front of the box and then screwed it in place. I then installed the plastic pieces and the ball that come with the joystick. Installing the buttons is as simple as sliding them into each hole and screwing on the plastic nut that came with them. You'll notice later that I changed the color arrangement, and I also changed the text on top of each button using my Cricut. There is plenty of tutorials on YouTube showing you how to do this, and I'll link one down in the description. Each button and the joystick get plugged into the board using jumper cables. It doesn't matter where they get plugged in, except for the joystick that has a special port. Once they are all plugged in, there is a USB cable that plugs into the end of the board and ran down to the back of the machine. One last thing before I move on, I painted the inside of the front panel black. I glued the top together including the light that I made in my last video and painted the entire thing with primer and blue. While I was waiting for that to dry, I glued the side panels to the frame. Once the paint was dry, I glued the top in place. The front panel needs to be hinged from the bottom to allow usage of the buttons, and I ran into a lot of issues here and failed pretty bad. My plan was to use some clear plastic hinges that I had bought off Amazon, so I cut out slots on the bottom of the panel and super glued them in place. Once dry, I discovered that this wasn't going to work and they just broke off. So then I went to Bunnings and bought some brass hinges, screwed them on, and can you see the big issue yet? Well, this is where I discovered that the hinges won't work here due to the strips on the sides hitting on the base. So again, off to Bunnings to get some hinges that I can install on the sides. I used a rotary tool to cut off the overhang. A little test and thankfully it worked. I reinstalled the button box and it all works too. Woohoo! To power the machine, I bought this IEC plug with a built-in switch. I cut a hole to fit the plug into the back panel using a Stanley knife nice and snug. I can now wire this power board to the back of the switch. The power board I'm using has 4 built-in USB ports, which is perfect to power the speakers and Raspberry Pi. If you can't find a power board like this, then you can just use my original plan, which is to use a normal power board and a USB plug, as you can see here. Don't forget to get a fuse with the plug. I couldn't work out why my plug wasn't working till I realized it didn't come with a fuse. Setting up the Raspberry Pi was pretty easy, and to use it as an arcade, I'm going to use a program called Recalbox. I will have 2 links down below showing how to rotate the image to landscape mode, and also how to install Recalbox and get ROMs onto your arcade. Due to getting moved around a lot, there is some scuff marks on the Tardis, so I went around and touched up the paint everywhere. I decided to install some felt inside the front door for 2 reasons. 1, I wasn't happy with how it looked, and 2, I want to have this overhang on the top so when you open the door you can flap it underneath for the door to sit on so the paint won't get scratched. The edges of the felt were rough, so I used a lighter to lightly melt them and clean them up. I could then put the front stickers on and give the entire Tardis a coat of clear for a little bit of protection, but also to add a little shine. Last step was to glue a piece of felt on the bottom of the Tardis and give it the lighter treatment, and with that, we're done. This arcade is a present from my best mate, and this is his reaction. Unfortunately, there was construction next door and the original audio is unusable, but you can see by his reaction he loved it. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button and share the video to someone you think would enjoy it. Also, please consider subscribing so you don't miss out on any of my future videos, and check back next week for a shorter video making the exploding gift box. You can also follow me on social media and I'll have links to all of that in the description. Also check out my podcast, I'll have links to that in the description as well. Also a link to all the videos I talked about in the video and a link to PARA-dise Creations.
A great success!